So as many of you are probably aware, I was lucky enough to run a One D&D One Shot last Thursday on January 25th with Chris from Tree at Monk's Temple, Colby from D4, and Gator from Pack Tactics. This was probably one of the most simultaneously fun and terrifying experiences of my D&D career, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, now that it's over, I wanted to share some of my thoughts on the event itself and my impressions of One D&D through the lens of the playtest. Firstly, some context. I don't think it's possible to overstate the level of imposter syndrome that I was feeling when everyone actually agreed to the one-shot. These are people that I've been watching for years online. I've been watching Colby since before he had his 5,000 subscriber celebration Battle Royale stream, so it was honestly surreal to have him participating in my own. Speaking of which, thank you all so much for all your support recently and helping me absolutely smash the 5,000 sub milestone. I am truly blown away. My goal for February is to see if I can hit 6,000, so if you enjoy what I do and want to help support me, a sub to the channel would be amazing. Thank you. Also, shout out to my two Warrior tier members, Julio and Jackal3. I couldn't do it without you guys. If you want to become a member for as little as $1 per month to help support me, hit that join button and check out all of the awesome perks that go along with it. Anyway, enough with all that stuff. Let's talk about the one-shot and One D&D. At the end of the video, I'll be sharing some miscellaneous thoughts about a lot of the comments that came up, so stick around if you want to see those as well. When it came to designing the encounters themselves, it was definitely complicated. I obviously had a really good idea of what types of characters everyone was going to be making, but I really wanted to make sure that I wasn't intentionally picking things that would exploit a known weakness in one of their builds. Not because I didn't want them to fail, but because to me, that's just not fun. It feels adversarial and it's not really what I ever want to do at one of my tables. Similarly though, I didn't just want to play directly into their builds and strategies either. Fortunately for me, this was fairly easily accomplished since, as anyone who watches this channel knows, an optimizer, I am not. The ideas and combos that they were throwing out just had so many steps that it really just became easier to think about what I wanted to do rather than focus on them at all. So that's what I did. I knew that I wanted to run 3 encounters to challenge different elements of general character design while also being fun and thematic. I settled on the first encounter being Githyanki themed since, like basically everyone else here, I've been playing excessive amounts of Baldur's Gate 3 and I thought it sounded really fun and topical. Encounter 2, I settled on a dragon because, well, it's Dungeons & Dragons, and I really felt like I had to. This encounter actually changed so many times, probably the most out of the 3. At one point it was a red dragon with more Githyanki, at another point it was a blue dragon with some air elementals, and I even think at some point I had 2 different types of dragons in there. It was a lot. I ended up settling on the deep dragon concept primarily because it's just a different type of dragon that a lot of people probably aren't all that familiar with, and I'm just a sucker for the Underdark and drow themed anything. For the final encounter, I knew I wanted something else iconic and quintessentially D&D, which is how I landed on the Beholder. I spent a while figuring out different minions, but settled on the Ogre battering rams because they have an interesting reaction that lets them make an attack when a creature comes into their range and bounce them away, and I thought it could be fun to have the party bouncing back and forth between the ogres while they were trying to get close. Obviously though, that didn't happen. So let's talk about the fights. The Githyanki fight was designed to focus on targeting the mobility of the characters. Each of the Githyanki had access to some form of teleportation, whether that was through the Misty Step spell or the Astral Step feature, which a few of them also had. The goal here was to try and bounce around the map, staying out of range, while the Githyanki Gish in the back just unleashed tons of damage. This largely worked, maybe even too well. The Gish's telekinetic bolt attack is just really strong, and it didn't take long to have Colby's character running low on health. Something I didn't anticipate being quite as potent as it ended up being was telekinesis on Chris's character. This coming out on round 1 and effectively removing him from combat for a full round was really powerful. There were a few reasons that I wanted to try this. Battling status conditions is obviously a big part of the game, but it's often even more relevant at higher levels in D&D, like this was. This is something that I've learned over the years, and having my weekly table be at 19th level. Because at that point, they can just do so much and they're so strong that they can often just kill pretty much anything without all that much effort. Sure, you can buff a monster's hit points or armor class and things like that, but I've never found that to make for a particularly fun or engaging fight. Imposing status conditions and utilizing the environment can effectively limit what a player can do on their turn or require them to make alternative choices, and it's just often so much more fun and exciting. Odds are the party's gonna win, but this at least challenges a new way of thinking rather than just, I hit hard. This brings me to a few points that I would like to see addressed in 1D&D design moving forward. I would love to have monsters get more interesting ways to interact with players during combat. Status conditions are obviously a great way of accomplishing this, but so are movement abilities. There are some conditions that I do think are problematic, like stun, but generally I find this to be more fun. A lot of recent monster designs have also greatly improved the action economy of monsters, which has been really great to see, so I do hope this continues within the 2024 Monster Manual as well. The second thing is spells and other effects that rely on checks rather than saving throws. Chris mentioned this in his video, but I really just want to double down on it. Telekinesis targeting a strength check rather than a strength saving throw is both extremely potent and counterintuitive. Spells that do this, like Telekinesis and Bigby's Hand, challenge the conventional wisdom that a check is something that a character makes when they are attempting something, whereas a saving throw is made by the character to avoid something happening to them. Quoting Chapter 7 of the Player's Handbook under the Saving Throw section, quote, "A saving throw, also called a save, represents an attempt to resist a spell, a trap, a poison, a disease, or a similar threat. You don't normally decide to make a saving throw, you are forced to make one because your character or monster is at risk of harm." What I'm getting at is that I do hope that spells that target checks rather than saves are revisited in the 2024 books. It's counterintuitive design that doesn't add anything of value to justify their existence. Once the telekinesis dropped and Chris and Gator were able to get involved in the fight, it was pretty decisively in their favor. I don't think I had actually appropriately accounted for the amount of movement that they had. The new Conjure Animal spell is also extremely powerful, but honestly, I really liked it, despite being on the receiving end of it all the time. It felt good and still thematic, and also didn't slow play to an absolute crawl. It didn't hurt that Colby was also critting like an absolute madman either though. A quick note on Weapon Masters as well, since this was the first fight to feature them. Yes, they do feel clunky with them being tied to weapons themselves, as this does incentivize that constant weapon swapping. I'll chuck some element of that up to the newness of the system in general and lack of familiarity, but as I said in other videos, I really feel like that they should just be tied to the character rather than the weapons. The second encounter was obviously built around the dragon with spellcaster support, using things like Darkness and Web, which never actually got cast because that nerd got killed on turn 1. The concept here was to be able to use battlefield control spells combined with the Deep Dragon's unique mobility options of being able to both burrow and fly to really dominate space on the map. But again, this proved to be no match. There were two real stars of this encounter, Stunning Strike and Conjure Animals, or in this case, Conjure Tarrasques. Side note, it was just a token that we used, there were no actual Tarrasques on the battlefield. Once again, Conjure Animals proved incredibly strong, but not only for its damage output, but also for its ability to control space. This might be an underrated element of the spell, I'm not sure, but either way, it was really good. There were multiple moments during the fight where I just didn't know where to move because the swarm of Tarrasques would have just annihilated me. As for Stunning Strike, despite the fact that I'm generally not a fan of the stun condition, as I mentioned earlier, I had to say that this version of the feature felt much better than its 2014 counterpart. Again, despite being on the receiving end of the feature throughout the one-shot, it was really nice to not have the monk's entire turn focused around trying to execute a stun. It being limited to once per round and still getting damage as a consolation on a failed save feels really powerful. I do kind of wonder if they should replace stun with a new dazed condition, but I have to assume that given the feedback they received for the monk from Playtest 8, that they're not going to be redesigning all that much. The final encounter with the Beholder was a quick one. Opening up to being enveloped by an anti-magic field seemed like a daunting prospect. I expected there to be some battle on the southern bridge with the ogres, all the while the Beholder would just be popping off eye rays one after another. Obviously, reality struck and this didn't happen. The Warrior of the Elements monk now has a new ability available at 11th level called Stride of the Elements, which gives the character both a fly and a swim speed equal to their speed for 10 minutes. This is obviously a very powerful ability and did largely end up nullifying the majority of the difficulty of this encounter, but I'm not really upset about it. Someone had asked in the comments how I feel about the Stride of the Elements feature, and I really don't mind it. Yes, anytime that a creature has the ability to fly, it fundamentally changes the way that you need to evaluate encounter design and strategy. But this comes at 11th level. There's so many ways your character can get a fly speed by this point that I don't really think it's that problematic. I mean, wizards could fly 6 levels ago when they got 3rd level spells. I suppose the bigger question here is, does it feel thematic and on brand? And I think so. Monks, and in particular Warrior of the Elements monks, are supposed to be one with the elements, and I feel like being able to adeptly fly and swim plays into that pretty well. The other heavy hitter in this fight was Gator being able to cast Hallow as an action. This was able to be achieved because of the revised version of Divine Intervention, which essentially allows the cleric to be able to select any spell on their list that doesn't require a reaction to cast and cast it as an action without requiring a spell slot or material components. This proved to be extremely powerful. I don't actually think it was necessary given the way that things were going, but it was an evocative demonstration nonetheless. Divine Intervention received a massive overhaul as the design team was clear about wanting to remove as many Mother May I spells and features from the game as possible, and the Divine Intervention feature was one such culprit. The thing about the feature though is that they really went hard with it. The 2014 version had such a low chance to succeed and still required some heavy DM hand-waving to make anything interesting actually happen, and it also had a really long cooldown period before you could use it again. The revised version has exactly none of those constraints. It always works, it has a defined list of effects, and you can use it every single day. Seeing it in action, I feel as though it's probably too powerful and also loses some of its aesthetic. There's multiple potential fixes for the feature, including making it only work with spells that already require an action, or continuing to let it work with the same subset of spells, but reinstating that cooldown. For me, I would tend towards reinstating the cooldown as the fix. I don't really mind some insane once-a-week ability. To me, that feels more fun when it's actually cast, but I also recognize how stale it can feel just staring at your character sheet and seeing an ability that you can't use for another week, which could be quite a few sessions of real time. I'm not 100% sold on which version I would prefer, but what I do know is that this ain't it. Overall, I had a ton of fun playing with the new stuff and getting to do it on stream for the first time. Let me know if that's something that you'd like to see more of in the future, and maybe I can try and make it more of a regular thing. Lastly, I want to take some time to go over a few other final thoughts and comments that I saw come up a lot on the video. Firstly, yeah, plenty of mistakes were made. I don't think any of us have ever professed to be perfect players. My goal was to make it feel like a home game, and I hope I accomplished that. Sometimes mistakes are made, and everyone just kind of rolls with it. Probably the thing that was brought up the most was me deciding to not have the dragon continue burrowing during the second fight. Some people mentioned that the party could have just readied actions and waited for it to pop back up and attempt to kill it that way. I stand by my decision though. Subjecting the group and the stream to a long, drawn-out encounter that relies on the party successfully guessing where the dragon is going to pop up and readying a single action on each round just seemed incredibly tedious and not fun for anyone involved. Chris did mention in his video that they could have potentially executed a grapple on it and held it there, and sure, that's technically true. In any case though, burrow mechanics feel really strong and could probably also use with some revising in One D&D. I also wasn't even actually trying to go for this long kill, it was just an inadvertent thing that led to a scenario that I wouldn't want to subject any of my players to. Also, yes, I did run burrow incorrectly as well. I technically couldn't have burrowed on the steps at the beginning, but the rest of the layer was fair game. And also, the save from Deep Torpor was still supposed to be Wisdom, not Charisma, but it turns out it wouldn't actually have changed all that much since Colby still failed the first save pretty horribly. Another thing that came up a lot was rest casting. I've never once allowed rest casting during any of my sessions ever, but that's probably because I've never actually had a single one of my players ever ask me if they could. Gator asked if I allowed it, and I said sure, mostly because I was genuinely curious how it would play out. After doing it though, I'll probably continue to just not use rest casting. I don't begrudge anyone for using it, rules as written, it's totally legit. But it's just not something I found myself enjoying. It has a transformative impact on the encounter that needs to be accounted for, but at that point, you may as well just not do it. The final points I wanted to make were about the overall power level and magic items. I spent a long time going over the encounters trying to plan things that would be both fun and interesting, but I was genuinely worried about TPKing everyone in a round or two, or it just ending in a one-turn kill for them. There were just so many variables, from new mechanics and rules to playing with people who really optimize every ounce of power out of their builds. It's just something that I'm not used to. As it turned out, things were probably a little bit on the easier side, but had I been able to land a few more attacks or spells, things definitely could have swung the other way very quickly. A lot of elements were really balanced on a knife's edge, even if it didn't look that way. Which reminds me, I am really excited to see what the new Dungeon Master's Guide is going to offer from an encounter builder perspective, and I also cannot wait to see the new monster manual in general. Lastly, on magic items, I think Chris is going to be talking about this in a future video, so I won't go too heavily into it, but essentially the initial plan was to offer a point-buy style system for magic items, whereby higher rarity items cost more points, and legendary items were just not even available. Now, I am fully aware that the rarity system in D&D is questionable at best. It's a topic I've touched on in the past and may eventually go in depth on in the future, but in any case, this was a fun and simple idea that I'd read a few years ago, and I've used it in multiple one-shots since, and haven't really thought all that much about it. Until now. So if me or anyone in my group is sitting down to make a character for a campaign or a one-shot and magic items are involved, we don't tend to think about the items all that much. They're absolutely secondary to the experience. We will tend to design our characters first and then eventually get around to finding an item that might support the concept and just kind of move on. It turns out that this is not how optimizers play. This option resulted in some decision paralysis, as having so much available just allowed them to take their characters into so many different directions based on the item that they chose. This became problematic since it was clear that the builds may end up highlighting the magic items more than the characters themselves, which was obviously what we wanted to highlight much more. Eventually, I think it was Colby that suggested just allowing multiple +1 weapons, and that seemed to strike a fair balance and rein things in a little bit, while still allowing the new characters to shine. And while I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with the approach that I had initially taken, I definitely now see the value in having a more refined and limited pool of items when running a game for optimizers, or really for any group that you just don't know very well. If I were to do it again, I would probably just curate a list of maybe 20 or 30 items and allow everyone to pick 3 without repeating. At the end of the day though, this was an incredibly fun experience, and I'm honestly looking more forward now to the 2024 books than I have been at any other point. I still think that there's a lot of refinement that needs to be done, but I am confident that it'll deliver. I learned a lot from this one-shot and my amazing party. Shout out to Chris, Colby, and Gator. Given the chance, I would definitely run some things differently, but overall, I'm really happy with how everything played out. Hopefully, we can do it again in the future. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing or becoming a member for as little as $1 a month. Check out the one-shot or some of my other D&D videos, but otherwise, take care.